Now, as Russia makes its position clear on Syria, China says no side should rush to prejudge the results of any investigation by UN inspectors if they're allowed into the area, which was allegedly attacked with chemical weapons. Well, we can now talk to Middle East expert Nabila Ramdani. She joins us from central London. Good morning to you. Thank you very much for your time. A lot of this appears to hang on whether or not the UN chemical weapons inspectors can get to the site. We are hearing reports this morning from Syrian activists that, according to them, they have spoken to a UN team member and they are trying to smuggle out samples of tissue, hair, skin and blood. Will that go some way to helping us to establish whether this suspected attack happened or not?
Well, I think any effort can certainly, help the UN inspectors, weapons inspectors to carry out their duty, but that wouldn't come as a substitute for them actually going on the sites of the atrocity. And this is the most challenging task for them at the moment, first and foremost because there are very real logistical reasons to preventing them from doing so. Assad is not currently cooperating, and this is a major hurdle in itself. He's not allowing them to investigate those sites. But even if he were, there are very real, security issues also surrounding them venturing on those sites. It's a difficult job at the best of times, as we've seen in Iraq, for example, when during a time of peace, when UN inspectors were put under an awful lot of pressure and were strictly monitored by government forces, let alone during a very fluid and indeed dangerous situation, as is the case in Syria at the moment. This is a country which is at war, and clearly there are no clear lines of demarcation. Violence can happen anywhere. The situation is so volatile that, you don't have the rules of engagements are not those of conventional armies fighting each other. So it's very difficult to implement a ceasefire, for example. And of course, when you're dealing with chemicals, there are all sorts of health issues involved as well for the UN inspectors. So they are very brave inspectors indeed, but it is very unlikely that their objectives will be attained.
So how difficult will it be then for the UN inspectors on the ground in Syria to get access to the site? Because you talk about those logistical obstacles. People might think, well, why can't they just go undercover, for example? It's not that easy, is it?
No, it's not that easy at all. And in fact, the United Nations has expressed concern about, not putting the lives of their inspectors at risk. But I would also contend that, the Western leaders are already saying that any form of intervention can only come, from a position of certainty, meaning the collection of evidence. And I would argue that this is a classic fudge, effectively, because it's very obvious that, monstrous atrocities are taking place, that the Assad regime is indeed a murderous regime, and that yet the repercussions, the potential repercussions of a military intervention by Western countries are so immense and indeed so frightening that the international community is doing everything possible not to get involved. And the lack of firm scientific evidence is simply one of those excuses. And already comparisons are being made by observers and indeed human rights groups saying that, we might find ourselves in the situation back in July 1995 when the United Nations failed to protect the 8,000 or so men and boys who were slaughtered in Bosnia, in Srebrenica. And if these atrocities were not committed in Syria at the moment, were to go unpunished, then there's a fear that they will be repeated.
How aware do you think Assad will be of the fact that it appears, at least, that the UN is almost in a position where it can't move, it can't take any action, because you're always going to have this resistance from China and from Russia? Will he be taking that seriously?
Well, I think that would play to his advantage, and I would also argue that Assad has long since ceased to care what the international community thinks of him. He has, a war on his hands, and what he's concerned about first and foremost is to maintain his grip on power, and he will do whatever it takes to defeat his enemies on the ground. And what we tend to forget is that there's a vicious civil war going on with both sides, fighting it till the bitter end and, not giving an inch to each other. This is total war, effectively, and there's no sign of it ending anytime soon.
Do you think then that we are unlikely to see any kind of international intervention, if you like? Do you think that we're more likely to see Syria kind of on a self-destruct path?
Well, yes, indeed. Sadly, this is already the case, and this is also reflected in the massive flux of refugees that are fleeing the country to protect their own lives. And, the civil war in Syria is bad enough, and there's a risk, of course, that this violence can be exported to neighboring countries, which has already been the case. We've seen, intense violence taking place in Lebanon, for example, to a certain extent in Turkey and neighboring countries. But perhaps the demographic, the economic and social and security repercussions on all the neighboring countries in the region it will be immense, and to the point that it will create problems that are as grave as the situation which created them, that is the Syrian civil war.
Okay, Nabila Ramdani, thank you very much. Really good to talk to you this morning.